Welcome to Let's Be Well Together podcast. We're your wellness check-in team. Join us each week or when you can. We enjoy exploring wellness concepts and reminding you to make time for wellness.
This is episode 72.
We hope our territorial acknowledgement improves allyship with Indigenous people within a reconciliation process. We're on the Haldeman Tract, located on the traditional territories of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We acknowledge the presence and traditional knowledge, laws, and philosophies of the Indigenous people with whom we share this land.
Hello, everyone. This is Elise Seifert and Sheila Webster here.
Hello.
What's on your mind?
Yes. And today we are going to talk about our trek in India that we did.
That's right.
So Elise and I was invited to join Elise and her friend, Julie. You can talk a little bit about what you did before that.
We did a 4-month backpacking tour. Mm-hmm. We started in Southeast Asia and then we moved into India. Mm-hmm. And I know that Julie's mom was interested in joining in the trip. So I invited my mom, Sheila.
Yeah.
So we were going to meet, originally we were going to meet in Nepal. Uh-huh. But unfortunately, there was an earthquake that hit maybe 2 to 3 weeks before we were supposed to go.
Mm-hmm. We were still thinking that we might be able to go.
We were. It was a pretty devastating earthquake, though.
Yes.
Our company, we had booked a tour. We wanted to see the Himalayas. Uh-huh. So the tour company that we had booked with was really encouraging us to come because they were losing a lot of business because of the earthquake. Mm-hmm. But unfortunately, there was a lot of devastation at the airport itself.
Mm-hmm. That's true.
And we just didn't feel good about going at a time where people were really struggling. So ultimately, we decided to go to India right away.
It was a good decision, we found out later on, because you get your visa when you're at the airport in Nepal, and they were not giving out any visas to anyone. So even if we did decide to go to Nepal, we wouldn't have been able to. We wouldn't have been able to get a visa. So it was a good decision. So we decided that we were going to go on the other side of the Himalayas, which is on the Afghan-India border.
That's right.
Up. And I arrived in New Delhi, and the next day we went on a flight to Srinagar, which was really beautiful. And then we took a car ride with our tour guides up to the mountain.
We did. And wow, they were mountains.
Oh my goodness. I couldn't believe it. I remember Elise saying to me, "So have you been training for this hike up the mountain?" I'm like, "Why? You're just walking up a hill, right? It's not that difficult." Oh my goodness.
It was a little more difficult than that.
It was, because I thought, I work out. I'm physically in shape. I can do this. No problem. Well, guess who got hit first?
Sheila.
I did. Again, I do blame a little bit of jet lag because I did just land off the airport, had one night in Delhi, and then we flew. So I felt like it was a little bit of a rush to start our trek, but we get there. We had, I wouldn't call them Sherpas, but we had people who helped us. We didn't have to carry any of our own backpacks or any of our equipment at all. We just had to carry our own bodies up.
And it was still very difficult.
So difficult. And the very first day, we had 2 donkeys, one donkey that carried all our stuff, and the other donkey was basically just a security donkey that would help any of us if we needed help.
They knew that it was a difficult trek, so they had reserved the donkey for us if we had to ride it, just in case we couldn't quite make it up.
Yes.
And I think Sheila was the first one to ride the donkey.
To need the donkey. We were walking and I started feeling dizzy and really weak, and that feeling like, put one foot in front of the other. Just keep going. But I thought I was going to pass out. And I think the altitude had a lot to do with it too. I was getting altitude sickness, but I had to give in. I'm a very stubborn person, so it was so hard for me.
Yes, I don't often see you give in to something like that. So it was a really difficult trek. And for Julie and myself, we had been in the similar area for almost 4 months now. Mm-hmm. So I think we didn't have as much of the shock to the altitude as you and Deborah did. Mm-hmm. So I think that was a big contributing factor to why you found it difficult. And like you said, you were jet lagged.
Oh, it was. So I think I was on the donkey for a half hour maybe. Mm-hmm. And then I got off and I felt better, and then up I went. And
you made it.
The rest of the hike I did all by myself. So I was very proud, but it did take that first day for me to get acclimatized to the height.
Yes. And I think we were hiking in the Himalayas for 5 days. So we were living in a tent in the Himalayas. We had a base camp. So the first day we made it to our base camp and it was gorgeous.
Oh my God. I thought I was at the top of the mountain. Yeah. It felt like you were at the top of the mountain. You're just looking over, like imagine you were Sound of Music and there you are at the top of the mountain singing your song. That's what it looked like.
It was majestic. I think there's no other way to describe it. It just
wow.
It's hard to believe there's something so beautiful in the world, but
we're all sitting there at the top of this, not the top, we're at base camp and our 3 Sherpas are setting up the camp and they also cooked for us. So they carried all the food, all the cook instruments and everything on this donkey. And they opened up our tents for us and got the sleeping bags out and did all that. While they were doing that, we were looking at the view and sitting there. And doesn't Julie's toilet paper, we each had our own roll of toilet paper. And I was kind of like, this is weird. Like, can't we just have one toilet paper for each of us?
No, this is treasure.
And that's what Elise and Julie, they were like, no, we're not sharing our toilet paper. And then by the end of the Shrek, I totally wasn't sharing my toilet paper. I was like, no, this is mine. But doesn't Julie's toilet paper start rolling down the mountain? And she's pulling it sheet by sheet, like it didn't separate. It just started rolling and she's pulling it and laughing hysterically. I thought she was going to fall off the mountain actually trying to collect all her toilet paper.
And she did collect all of that toilet paper because she needed it.
And she rolled it all back up. Mm-hmm. That was a funny story the very first day. It was great. But then we did stay at base camp for another day. So we stayed there. We did a trek that day up a different side of the mountain and back down again. So that was nice. But the second day we're there, doesn't a bunch of shepherds start coming up the mountain?
Yes. So I couldn't believe how well the locals just climbed up the mountain so easily.
So easily.
I guess it goes to show you when you get used to a certain activity, it just becomes easier. But the shepherds come up the mountain when the weather starts to get hotter. Mm-hmm. And I think we were beginning of spring.
We were the beginning of spring. It wasn't yet spring because we ended up staying up in the environmental minister's camp and he wasn't there yet. And he's there for the whole spring, summer season. So it was a little bit before spring. So they were just starting to go up the mountain. And so here we are at base camp with, would you say 100 sheep?
Definitely.
100 sheep.
It sounded like 100 sheep.
And so they're all really cute and they're all bah, bah. But then when you're trying to sleep, they were sniffing around and like we're in a tent. So they can get really close to you and they're right at
right in your ear and
all night. And of course you have to remember that there's no bathroom. So when we go out in nighttime, when it's dark, have to go to the bathroom. So you take your toilet paper and you go and it's dark. And here you are in a pretty good hiding spot trying to go to the bathroom. And the sheep come, of course, because they're curious. Well, when there's a sheep, there's a shepherd because the shepherd have to protect their sheep. And there they are with their flashlights. And I got flashed. Like they came and they were like, what's going on? Like, cause it looks like someone's hiding in the bush or something. And then as soon as of course they don't speak English. So they were like saying whatever. And they'd look at me and they'd right away turn around and like go away. They were so embarrassed. And I was just as embarrassed. Yeah. So that was another experience we had.
And there was also a cougar.
Yes.
So I remember the shepherds had talked to our guides and our guides warned us, don't go out to the bathroom at night because there was a cougar that came and attacked several of the sheep. And so that was a little terrifying.
It was, yes.
Stopped our nighttime trips.
But to go, I mean, unless we desperately had to. We just didn't go too far. So then we left that base camp and kept going up and kept going up until it was so cold.
And we hit snow.
So much snow. I was really surprised when they told us to pack your winter coat, pack your mitts, and I'm like, oh, they're obviously not from Canada. They don't know what cold is.
Oh, it was cold.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah. And Julie and I had just been in Southeast Asia where it was 30 degrees every day. So we were not used to the cold. So we definitely needed those items. But there started to be snowy parts on the path, which made our path a little dangerous. So our guides would go ahead and they'd try to stomp out a path for us with their boots. And we would go one at a time because the path was quite narrow and it was just a steep drop beside us.
Yes.
And we are up in the mountains. We would not know what to do if we started to fall.
No.
So we began walking across the path and we had a bit of a scare.
Yes. Because one of us, we were walking and I think it was me. I'm not sure, but it was
Sheila.
So I just lost my step a little bit, but I caught myself. But the Sherpa looked at me and was afraid I was going to fall down the mountain. So he turned to stop me from falling, but I just missed a step. So I grabbed myself, but he started sliding down the hill. And here he is. It was so scary because he just started sliding down the hill and eggs were flying all over the place because he was holding all the eggs. And here he is trying to grab the eggs while they're flying in midair while he's sliding down.
And he grabs a tree.
Hugs it.
So he hugs this tree and it stops him from sliding and he uses his arms to pull himself back up the mountain. And the first thing he says to us is,
"Are you okay?"
Yeah. And I'm sorry I dropped all the eggs. And we thought, who cares about the eggs?
Who cares about the eggs? And we were like, "Are you okay?" And he always said, "If you're okay, I'm okay."
That's right.
If you're okay, I'm okay. And we were like, oh my goodness. So we kept going and we had eggs. He fed us so many eggs. I was kind of glad he lost those eggs.
We had enough eggs.
I've had enough eggs. I don't care if you ever make me eggs again. They wanted to keep protein in us, I think.
I think so.
Yeah. So that was probably the next, exciting thing that happened to us. So besides that, we had a wonderful, wonderful trek. It was a lot of work every day, but so worth it because it was actually unbelievable how majestic it was. It was so majestic that it was almost animated. Yes. Didn't look real. It was beyond words. So
it was incredible. And I don't think I'll ever have an experience like that in my life again. No. And I also never imagined I could see something like that in a place like India.
Me neither.
So I'm so glad that I got to see that in India and got to see a different side of that country than the hustle and bustle that most of the rest of the country is.
Yes, I agree.
And because we went in India instead of Nepal, I think it was a little less touristy. And it was very intimate. We got to know our guides very well. So I was so appreciative of that experience.
Yes, me too.
Guests are giving their time, expanding our minds. Today's interview is in the category of social wellness. There are many elements and moving parts associated with homelessness, so many that it can feel overwhelming. I'm speaking to my friend and mentor, Ross Earnshaw, who also happens to be a city councillor in Cambridge, Ontario. He's been educating himself on these issues, and he's a great person to provide us with a very high-level overview on some aspects. So welcome, Ross.
Thank you, John. Good to be here.
Councillor Ross Earnshaw studied music, science, and law before an exemplary career as a litigation lawyer in Waterloo Region. I worked with Ross. He was and is a mentor to me. He held executive positions with the Waterloo Region Law Association, the Law Society of Ontario, and the Federation of Law Societies of Canada. He was a board member with the Law Foundation of Ontario, an organization devoted to increasing access to justice for vulnerable and marginalized elements of society. After 40 years, he retired from the practice of law. He ran for and was elected as a city councillor last year. He's passionate about his community and the people living in it. In his spare time, he enjoys biking, hiking, the trails in and around Cambridge with his life partner, Suzanne. He has 2 adult sons, including our very own starving artist, Cameron. So Ross, I'm hoping to use a couple interviews to set the stage for discussion, as opposed to outlining solutions to the complicated issues surrounding homelessness. And in this first interview, I'll ask about the types of people who find themselves homeless and the practical challenges they face. Later, we can start a discussion on initiatives that have been attempted and the challenges they face. So let's start with the people. From what you see, Who are the types of people that find themselves homeless?
Well, John, I would say that it's almost anybody. Could be your neighbor, could be your friend, person next door. It depends a great deal on the circumstances, and what I've found is that no two stories are the same. Every homeless person has a story. So, for example, I was surprised to find in Cambridge there's a substantial population of elderly women who are homeless. And that's because it was a blue-collar town. There were a lot of industries where the husbands were generally the workers, and the pension plan was inadequate. Now those gentlemen have passed away, and their widows are unable to put food on the table and keep a roof over their head, and they're homeless. Unfortunately, when people say homelessness, they generally think of the worst element of homelessness, the people who are addicted, who are mentally ill, who are problems in society. But what I found is that there are all kinds of people who are in a homeless situation. Some people actually have jobs, but don't make enough money to be able to put a roof over their heads.
I think that's true. Like when I first started thinking about the issue, I would think of that. People who didn't want to work, couldn't work, had mental health issues. Now I'm hearing that you get people from all walks of life. I imagine there are a lot of resources out there. So there are shelters and beds and whatnot available. And so some of the people who maybe don't suffer from the kind of mental health issues or drug dependencies, maybe they can find their ways to those shelters. I don't know.
Well, there's a continuum of housing all the way from homelessness, which is our topic today, up to, McMansion palaces, and everything in between. And we find ourselves in an era where there is a shortage of housing in almost that entire continuum. I've learned to use certain terms of art since I've embarked on this, my third career maybe? So there's supportive housing, there's shelter, there's affordable housing, then there's, fully integrated into society housing. And people who are homeless, whatever background they may have, will need to work their way through those levels of housing if they wish to integrate back into society. So I'm having some trouble sort of articulating it, but what I found is that the homeless people, and I'm afraid I'm being pretty general here, but they don't necessarily move forward in the way that you or I might think of moving forward. They may move from a homeless situation into some kind of shelter and then move back to homelessness. They may move out of a shelter and into some kind of supportive housing and then slide back to a shelter. They don't necessarily follow a progression. So that makes it harder for us to understand what's going on in their minds. I hope that helps.
It does, and I've actually heard that discussion too, in terms of people who are fighting drug addictions, that it's not unusual for them to take steps forward and then find themselves moving back.
Yeah, I think what I need to underline here is that people with drug addictions certainly are part of the homeless population. But I've also learned that there are functioning addicts who live at home, hold down a full-time job, and aren't homeless at all. And by the same token, there are people who have nothing to do with drugs who find themselves in circumstances where they're homeless because their revenue simply isn't sufficient to permit them to keep a roof over their heads.
Now, I know leading up to the election, you knocked on a lot of doors, you talked to a lot of people. This was an issue that was important to you. I'm guessing that at times you had some people who were a bit combative or dismissive because they had assumptions about who homeless people were. Did you have any occasions where they were surprised when you gave them some information about who they were actually talking about? For example, elderly women and whatnot?
Yes, certainly I did. But when you talk about combative, there is a tendency to think of the homeless as those who are addicted or have mental health issues and not realize that there is a considerable segment of the homeless population that has none of those issues. And that is an eye-opener to most people. What I found most telling was that the people who objected most strongly to harm reduction initiatives were people who had never had anyone in their family or close to them ever involved with drug addiction. And I spoke to people who had friends or family who were somehow addicted, and I found them the most open to the possibility of rendering assistance to people who are in a homeless situation.
Unfortunately, the way the world is right now, a lot of us do have friends or family who are in that situation. And I think that does, for example, it makes me more open to trying to find ways to help and hoping we can find ways to help. And just to get on a soapbox for a second, what I see is around the world, every major city, even the size of KW in Cambridge, we have this issue. And with all the brilliant people in the world, we haven't been able to solve it yet. And for me, the reason I'm talking about this in part is because I at least want to start a conversation where people understand what the topics are. So we're not going to come up with that solution, but hopefully there's going to be a little more incentive and caring so that smart people can start working together and figuring it out if there's a way through this.
Can I just say that I didn't end my self-education when the election was over last October. And so I've been to 2 seminars or symposia since the beginning of May of this year. The first was put on by the Association of Municipalities of Ontario, and the second by the Federation of Canadian Municipalities. And at both of those conferences, it was clear that there is not a municipality anywhere in this country, from coast to coast to coast, north to south, large urban to small rural, extreme north. There's not a municipality anywhere that's not suffering with the difficulty of addressing a homeless issue at some level. It's shocking to me. It's pervasive. It's everywhere.
Hopefully that shock and that surprise and that knowledge will give us the incentive we need to try and sort something out. But I also truly believe that because the issues are so complex, it will take smart people, money, lots of effort and lots of caring to figure it out.
You're absolutely right about the complexity. I mean, at root, it is a lack of homes. There's a lack of housing. But there's also the mental health issue, the rehabilitative counseling services, the physical health of people who are living without a home, the mental health, psychiatric assistance, and so on. And a lot of what I've learned dates back to the early to mid-90s when psychiatric hospitals were no longer funded. And people were supposedly being integrated from those facilities back into society. And frankly, we're finding some of them living in our homeless encampments now.
Because the funding was taken away, they were moved out of where they were and now back onto the streets. Okay, well, I did, and I still might want to ask you about some of the challenges homeless people face, but because of something you just said, I want to kind of zero in on a particular topic, which is, why don't people, if there's shelters available, why don't people just go to them? But I suspect that there's something to do with extra challenges that are faced by people who have either mental health problems, drug dependencies, or maybe they have a tendency towards violence.
Yeah, I'm glad you raised that because there was a court case recently in Kitchener, in the Superior Court of Ontario, as a result of an encampment that was located at Victoria Street in Kitchener. The application was brought by the region for validation of its attempt to evict the inhabitants of that camp. And one of the arguments, the primary argument that was made on behalf of the region, was that there were far more shelter beds in the regional municipality of Waterloo than there were people in that encampment. But the judge rejected that argument and accepted the proposition that it's not just a numbers game. The shelter beds or the other forms of accommodation that are available to people suffering homelessness have to be what he called truly accessible, low barrier. And by that he meant, for example, there are many shelters that won't take couples. There are many shelters that won't take someone with a pet. Oftentimes there are drug users actively using in the shelters, whereas, as we've discussed already, some people in these homeless encampments want nothing to do with drugs, and so they don't want to be in that environment. There's mental health issues where some people simply can't be inside, and many of the homeless are fearful that if they are in a shelter situation, they'll be robbed, they'll be beaten. It's not necessarily a safe place. So I'm often told, well, there are lots of shelter beds. Well, there are more shelter beds than there are people in this encampment. Why don't they just move in? And the answer is, well, there are more shelter beds, but they're not truly low barrier and accessible.
from what you see, where do most of the people, let's take the people who aren't in shelters, they just don't have anywhere to go. In our region, where do you find these people are living? And are they living in tents? Are they living underneath overpasses? How does it work?
Well, I walk around, and in the summer I bicycle all around what I've learned to call Ward 4 in the city of Cambridge. And you'll find tents, little encampments, 1 or 2, 3 tents, buried in the woods at the end of a trail, beside a creek. Sometimes there will be a larger encampment in a place where there's just accessibility to water and maybe food. Right now, the big problem in my ward is at 150 Main Street, which is right in the heart of downtown Galt. It happens to be a regional property, and the encampment there is of the same ilk as the one on Victoria Street, and I believe the region is reluctant to move to take the inhabitants away from there because they feel they're constrained by the reasons for decision in the case that they tried. So they're everywhere. And the other thing is, of course, that if they are moved along, if they happen to be on private property, for example, private property owners have every right to remove encampments. But where do they go? There is no housing. There's no truly accessible, low-barrier housing. So there's no place for them to go. So they move from one street corner to another. They move from one park bench to another. I've often heard it facetiously described as whack-a-mole. That's kind of an unkind way of thinking about it, but it's pretty illustrative of the way it works.
But as you say, they really have no choice.
Correct.
I guess that's all we can do for today and hopefully we've got some people interested in this as a problem, and hopefully we can get some people thinking about solutions and looking more into the background. So I'm going to turn to a question we ask every guest, and it's in the context where we all have areas of wellness that are important to us, but not enough time to focus on all of them at once. It's essentially a mini wellness check-in. Are you currently neglecting an area of wellness in your life? And if so, can you think of even one thing you can do to foster wellness in that area?
Yes, I can. I knew that you'd be asking me this question, and I gave it some thought on my way here, John. As you probably know, I have a music degree, and I got that degree in piano. And I had fallen away from playing the piano quite a lot while I was engaged in my career. When I retired 3 years ago, I started to play the piano again, and I was feeling pretty good about myself. But since I've become involved in this city councillor role and all of the activities that are involved with it, I've fallen away from playing the piano again. And so that's where I feel that I don't have enough music in my life. Well, the starving artist story. Cameron sort of comes by at least a modicum of his talent by natural means, and I miss it a lot. So I do sing. I still sing in 2 choirs. I still go to the symphony whenever I can, but I'm not playing the piano. So I think the answer is just make some time, make it part of my life.
Did you ever play music with Cameron?
Yeah, once in a while we do, but generally he plays because he's far better at it than I am, and then I sing, or we sing together.
Yeah, just a quick tidbit too for people who are listening in who are regulars. The reason why I connected with Cameron, so Ross is visiting us today, which is fantastic. The reason we connected with Cameron is because a couple of years back, Cameron came and played some music at our place when Ross and Suzanne were visiting, and it was amazing. We had a great time and we made a great connection, and I'm so glad because he adds so much to our show. So thank you, Ross. I really appreciate you taking time to bring some of this information to our attention, and hopefully it'll lead to something useful.
Pleasure being here.
I'm a retired artist, dancing through life. Once I finished dancing and teaching, I was trying to find what was my next activity I was going to do. I didn't want to work full time. I didn't want to start a new business or do anything like that. I just wanted something just to occupy my time a little bit. I was finding, though, that I was missing the socialness. I was missing talking to the parents, talking to the kids, moving a lot. So I needed to find something that had all of these. My sister said that they were actually looking for some help catering at her bar that she works. She's a waitress, but this particular bar also does catering, and I love doing catering. I don't need to input the machine. I don't need to deal with cash. I'm just there doing the scheduled food and everything and socializing. I love it. It's fun. I get to enjoy seeing all the people, but I'm also working, which makes me happy because I'm moving. And I absolutely love doing weddings. Sometimes I do manage the weddings, which just means that I have to be the one in charge. Once I get there, I look at the schedule. I figure out what's going on. I look at the staff. I figure out who's going to do what. There's a lot of things that you need to do. Like at dinner service, you got to make sure the water's topped off. You got to make sure the wine is topped up. You got to get the food out. You also have to clear the food and you have to deliver coffee. So all those things, you need different staff and different people to bring you this and do this. So here I am at a wedding. Before anyone gets there, the service is going on off-site. I'm just looking at all the plates, making sure everyone has what they need. All the cutlery's there, the glassware's there, the napkins are there. Everything's where it's supposed to be. I'm looking at the names and trying to find all my food allergies. Who has food allergies and where are they? So I make sure that they get the proper food and that they don't eat what they're not supposed to. So I'm looking at this and someone goes by and says, hi. I look up very occupied and said, oh, hi. And I keep going about my thing. The band was setting up and they were playing and it was sound check. And he seemed very into the sound of the band and what was going on. So I just assumed he was part of the band or a manager or maybe the actual sound person. And I kept going about my thing. And then I'm doing the appetizers and getting prepped there. And he comes into our prep station and says, hi, Sheila, how are you? And I look up and it's Cameron. I couldn't believe it. I'm like, Cameron, what are you doing here? Cameron lives in Ottawa now, as I'm sure you all know. And I'm in Kitchener. And here he is at the wedding. And he says, well, the groom was part of my band when I lived in Kitchener, and he is the drummer. So I'm here as a guest, but I'm also played for the ceremony, and I'll be playing during the cocktail hour. I'm like, this is awesome. First of all, I get to hear Cameron. Love hearing Cameron play and Cameron sing and just seeing him in his element. We hear about it all the time, but when you actually see him performing, it's just very fun. So I get to see that, but I also get to catch up. I asked him about what's going on. He has all these things juggling going on, and listening to the podcast, I can tell that there's some really cool things that are happening. And did it go? Didn't it go? How's this going? And he filled me in and it was wonderful. So I just thought it was really cool. And I thought I'd pop in here and tell you guys that I saw Cameron at a wedding. How much fun is that?
We love our listeners and thanks for joining us. Please help spread the word about Let's Be Well Together podcast. Follow us and rate us on Spotify, Apple, Google, or your favorite podcast platform. Follow us on Instagram at lets.be.well.together and let your friends know about us.
Move that body like we're meant to do.
Hello, everyone. It's Elise Seifert here, and I'm joined by Julie Wilson. Hey, Julie.
Hey, how are you?
I am doing great, Julie. Actually, I was just reading about something that reminded me of a topic we've already discussed. So in a past episode, we were discussing exercise snacking.
Oh, my favorite term.
Yes, I know. Just bite-sized exercise. And a social media post came up for me on Obey Fitness about a term called NEAT. And it's an acronym for non-exercise activity thermogenesis.
Interesting. I've never heard that.
No. So it actually includes any kind of physical activity that you would do throughout the day that wouldn't necessarily be labeled as exercise. For example, walking your dog, climbing the stairs, carrying your groceries, pacing while you're on a call or doing work, and many more.
Oh, that's fascinating because they often talk about I'm generalizing, but you often hear of, just getting up and moving or typing, or as you said, chewing something, and it all little bits of it, the cumulative effect of that is, contributes to your overall well-being, right?
Exactly. Yes. And I never really realized that there was a term for this, because you do hear people talk about making sure that you get your steps in and making sure you're getting up and walking once every hour throughout the day. And as it turns out, there is a term, and there are some suggested activities that you could do to improve your NEAT or increase the NEAT that you get throughout the day.
I like all of these little terminologies that we're getting. So exercise snacking, increasing your NEAT. They're so positive, right?
So positive.
What are some of the things that they're suggesting?
One suggestion that they have is while you're working maybe on the phone or via Zoom, you can try to stand up more and pace as you're doing your meeting or your phone call.
Ooh, I could do that.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Another suggestion is to skip the elevator or the escalator and take the stairs instead.
Oh, I like that. That's always a good one.
Another suggestion is to walk down every aisle in the grocery store, even if you're not picking anything up from that aisle.
I like that, right?
Yes. So just an extra way to get those steps in, because you're already at the grocery store anyway. And who knows what you might find down that aisle that maybe you needed.
And I just thought too, when you're shopping for groceries, you know how most places now have your carry bags. So maybe instead of, just for a bit of weightlifting or weights, that type of thing, why don't you just, add it to your bag, add certain items to your bag before you check out. There'd be a little bit of weight bearing, right?
I think that's a great idea. Look at that. And the final suggestion they have here is while you're doing chores, crank up the music and have a little dance party.
Oh, that's the best. Don't you love dancing and singing?
Definitely. I know I always love putting on songs when I'm doing chores, like cleaning the floors. So I think that's a great suggestion.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, for sure. You have to have the tunes, right?
Definitely. And I know I've done a conversation on the podcast here with Sheila, and she's talked about how when she would pump gas, she would do calf raises while she's waiting for the gas. So that's another great way to increase your NEAT.
Increase your NEAT. So all of these little ways you could really start to think about, obviously things like yard work, that type of thing. I like now that I know that there's a term, right? That you are improving your NEAT. So even those little things that you're doing is just adding up and increasing, as we said earlier, just that cumulative effect of all of these items just improves your overall well-being.
I think that's great. And hopefully we can find ways to increase our NEAT.
There's a thought. Popped up while running. It was so great to get back outside again after running on a treadmill for a few months. I really didn't run outside in winter almost at all. A few times, but not many. So it was great to get back outside. When I went back to start running in the treadmill, I hadn't run on a treadmill in a really long time, and I kind of was scared. Turned out that I had good reason to be. After being used to running outside, especially in the fall where it's cool out, going to run on a treadmill inside is really hard for me. I feel constrained, almost like the air's too hot. It's not fresh or something. And so when I'm running, I'm like, I can't get oxygen. It's hard. But I eventually got back into it, and it was getting not only easy, but I was realizing there were some really great things about running on a treadmill that I wasn't getting outside. When I was running outside and I had no specific training, I had let myself just kind of lollygag. I wasn't really pushing myself. And when you're on a treadmill, you set the speed, it's going to go that speed. It's going to keep going that speed. You got to run consistently. Then I got into the habit of doing a little bit of high intensity once in a while. So the normal speed, which I slowly worked my way up. And then for the high intensity, I would do, 3 minutes fast, 3 minutes slow. And I was thinking, wow, there's lots of great stuff on the treadmill. So now we're back to running outside again. And I'm like, oh no, can I run outside? Because I don't know, that's the way my mind works. Whatever I have to do that's different, I'm like, I don't know if I can do it, but I can. So I was out for my run today outside, and I realized something kind of interesting for me. So my personal observation about myself, when I'm on a treadmill running inside, I find it's physically easier. I don't know, maybe it feels like it's not as much thumping or hitting the concrete, but I find it physically easier for some reason, but mentally harder, because as time goes by, it's like, oh no, this is so boring. I need something. So if I'm doing a 10K inside, I have a real mental challenge the last half to kind of keep interested. I got to find podcasts and music and everything else. You know, I'm looking at the clock and it's like every kilometer seems to take forever, and then you get through it. So it's a bit of a mental challenge. When I'm outside, it's kind of the opposite. It feels a bit harder as I'm running, you know, maybe a bit more pounding of the pavement. Feels like I have to push myself a little harder or something. But the mental side's a lot easier. It's just easier to keep clicking the kilometers, and I don't really notice them going by. I don't have that problem where I'm like, oh, now what time is it? Oh, now how far is it? I just keep clicking along. I'm looking at birds. I'm looking at trees. I'm looking at the path. I'm waving at people that pass me. So that was my observation, that when I'm running on the treadmill, physically easier, mentally tougher. When I'm running outside, mentally easier, physically tougher. It's me. Am I?
Yeah. Just let me say, flip side of the coin.
Let's talk about sex, baby. Mm-hmm. Let's talk about you and me.
Mm-hmm. Or anyone else's.
Or anyone else? What the heck?
Not like that. I mean, anyone else's relationship.
I do not like talking about personal things.
No, he doesn't.
This podcast really is hard at times.
Yeah.
And this topic in particular is really hard.
Right.
And
because it's personal, right?
But it's personal.
But the thing that I wanted to say was there are things in relationships that are hard to talk about, not just sex.
Exactly. And I think it's a really good point. I think it provides the context, like the sex talk provides the context and makes the point. And so we just have to get out of our comfort zone because I really do think that for relationships in particular, it's a big part of relationships. It has a big impact on relationships. Well, communication and sex.
And sex, yeah. No, I agree with you that it is important that I didn't realize for a while.
So here's kind of like the overview that we were going to think about. We've been married a long time. Fortunately, we're okay talking about things to do with sex. And the general point, there's a couple of general points is, one, if you want to improve your sex life based on our own experiences, it's important to find the right fit over time. So there's going to be things that you like that your wife likes. There's going to be things that your wife likes that you like, but there's also going to be things that you like that she doesn't and that she likes and you don't.
Right.
And the only way you find out about that stuff is to try them. So have a lot of fun, experiment. But also if you don't like something, tell people. And if you do like something, tell people.
Tell people, yeah.
And that's the only way that over time you can develop this really nice rapport and have lots of fun.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and I agree. So I don't think it's as much about talking about sex, which is important in a relationship, but for this podcast or this little segment that we're doing, we're not talking about sex and how to do it and what to do it. We're just talking about...
No, we're not going to say what to do.
Yeah, we're just saying that you should talk to each other about it and, explore. That's what you're saying. And for me, I just thought, just in general, relationship, you need to tell each other how you're feeling and what you're feeling. For me, I don't have that issue saying what I want to say. I literally say everything that's on my mind right away. But for John, it's hard sometimes.
Funny you say that, because you're right. Like in almost everything to do to life, you will just say what you're thinking.
Just say what I'm thinking, and sometimes it's not appropriate, but I say it anyways.
Well, so let's give a non-sex example of how I kind of struggle with that a bit.
Yeah.
A few weeks ago, Sheila made a dinner, and...
Can I preface this, though?
Yeah.
We found this Vietnamese Thai restaurant in Collingwood that was really well priced, and we really enjoyed the food. Tried some pad thai, and I was like, hey, I think I can make this or kind of make it. So that's what I was trying to do.
Right. It just turned out that my batch had way too much soy sauce on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so when I ate it, it was like super salty.
Mm-hmm.
We had company too. Mm-hmm. So I definitely didn't want to say anything in front of company, but I was thinking I should tell Sheila later, I didn't really love that because I really hate insulting food that Sheila cooks because
he doesn't want to discourage me from cooking.
Is that why? I don't know why.
I think so. Because then I'd be like, you know what? Why don't you cook for the rest of your life?
So I couldn't say anything, but a week later I said, I didn't really like that.
Yeah, but he always prefaces it with, I know you're not going to like this. I know that you're going to get upset, but I need to tell you something. And I'm always thinking the world's going to cave in when he says that. And then it's just something light. Like, I didn't really like that dish.
Totally unconscious strategy, but sounds like a really good one because it seems like it works really well.
Okay, sure.
The point about all this is we just think that we enjoy our relationship more. We enjoy each other more when we're willing to talk to each other, tell the bad news, tell the good news, and then kind of adapt and work towards doing things in a way that we enjoy.
Agreed.
Please remember that we're not providing advice. We hope to inspire you to work towards balance, and we urge you to consult with qualified people if you need advice. The people on the show are speaking in their personal capacities. Their views expressed are their own, and don't represent the views or opinions of their outside contacts, their employers, or anyone else. We try to get things right, but we can't guarantee everything we say is correct, or that the things we talk about will work for you. Let's be well together, and let's be sure to do that in a safe way.
And that's the end of our episode today. I'm here. It's Elise Seifert here with Sheila Webster and John Webster.
Yes, that's correct.
And I'm here too.
Mm-hmm. So it's the end of another week, and it's been a pretty exciting time for me. It's the end of my school year.
Woo.
So as a teacher, this is the time when we're finding out our next year's assignments, and it's exciting because there's change coming up, and also kind of sad because you're saying goodbye to some students and maybe some staff members. So a mix of emotions right now, but still focusing on my exercise routine. So making sure I'm up every morning and doing my exercise routine. And I just got my pottery back from my pottery class.
Yeah, I saw that. They look beautiful.
I kind of felt like a kid at Christmas.
They turned out as good as you were hoping.
Yeah, I learned a lot about the process and about maybe how the glazing works and how they're going to turn out. Some of them didn't quite turn out how I wanted. Right. But that's okay. I learned.
Yes.
So that's pretty exciting.
Mm-hmm.
How about you, Sheila?
Well, we had a great week. I had a great week. And the highlight was probably our wellness weekend. Me and 3 other girls went up to...
I wasn't invited.
No, you were not invited because this was a girls' wellness weekend. And we went up to Collingwood at my sister's place and we went kayaking. We did yoga. We went hiking. We went to this little town and saw some art and then had lunch. And it was just really fun, really busy. Like we were so active, went swimming 3 times and we're outside quite a bit, but it was a lot of fun. So that was the highlight of my week last week. And John will tell you probably some more things that we did. So go take it, John.
I think you mean Feast for the Senses.
Yes.
Anybody who's a regular listener knows that we love going to Feast for the Senses at the KW Art Gallery. Mm-hmm. We got to go to another amazing one. And the food, my gosh, it was really good.
So good.
I don't know, it was really kind of hearty and flavorful. Mm-hmm. So that was fantastic. The big news for me is I've been spending so long trying to talk myself to get back into strength training. When we did our trip up to Collingwood a couple of weeks ago, I did that. And then, of course, I tweaked my back doing something else. Mm-hmm. So then I was thinking, oh, no, like how long is it going to take for a sore back muscle to heal? Well, it's healed.
Good.
And so this morning, I did some strength training. And I'm going to try and get back into it again, at least 2, maybe 3 times a week. So that's the big news for me.
That's great.
Did I cover what you wanted me to cover?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. All right. Well, hopefully everybody had a great week and enjoyed the show, and we'll come back for next week's episode, and bye for now.
That is it for today's show. Please try and make wellness a priority.
You deserve it.
If you feel the need to talk to someone or ask for help, please do that.
Accept yourself for the person you are.
So long.
Adieu.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Goodbye.